we're all living and working for longer, which means there actually needs to be a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think about individually managing our own careers over multiple decades, and as organizations, how you actually make that work for your organization. And with that comes a whole host of health challenges and just life.
Mridula, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, Chris. Thank you for having me.
It's nice to see you in person. I feel like after stalking you on LinkedIn for a while, you're real, you exist.
I am indeed.
That sounds really weird, but like there's so many people I connect with, like we connect with on LinkedIn, right? Don't really see, but then when you finally see them in person, you're like, oh, it's so nice and refreshing. How are you? How are things?
Really good, thank you. Really good. It's
What have you been up to?
Time. So, I mean, we're on the roller coaster that is the world of Peppy. So, constantly sort of onwards and upwards and, keeping finger on the pulse of particularly health and well-being. I mean, that's the space that we operate in, but really what's going on within organizations. And I mean, it's been a fascinating time to be on this journey through pandemic, business environment changing and, the tech world changing as well. So never a dull moment.
Before we get into that then, it perhaps would be good for everyone. Tell everyone a little bit more about your personal background.
Sure.
And then sort of the journey to Peppy, where we are today.
Sure. So I'm a healthcare commercial and strategy person. I started life though as a research engineer. So my background's in chemical engineering, worked in pharmaceutical manufacturing in the States at MIT for a number of years, working with pharma companies. Came back to the UK in 2009, joined McKinsey as a healthcare consultant. So worked for pharma companies, healthcare systems, regulators, various healthcare organizations.
What led you down that route though, just out of curiosity?
So, I mean, I joined a pharma project to begin with. As a sort of an obvious transition. I just really like the healthcare team based out of London and the European team. And obviously, as I sort of got into that, then there's sort of two sides to the coin, right? There's the pharma company and there's the healthcare systems they're selling into. So you sort of flip between the two. I think that was a really kind of shaping experience for me because one, I fell in love with healthcare. And B, I really saw some of the challenges of making healthcare change happen at scale through the existing infrastructure. So after a few years at McKinsey, I then went into the blue chip world. I joined Sandoz, which is a Novartis company, ran a business unit for them in the UK for a number of years. Then decided it was time for me to move into the startup world. I'd always sort of had my eye on that space, could start to see some really interesting things happening in the European tech scene, particularly in London. Met my co-founders when we all joined another startup, and then within a few months Peppy was born, and here we are now 5 years later.
What was the moment for you though when you decided that you wanted to make that transition? Because it's quite daunting to say, hey, I'm going to walk away from a stable career and go on this journey and start a business.
Well, I think so. It probably wasn't a very logical point. I mean, I just I had two very, very young children, so it's not the obvious time to say, you know what, I'm going to pack in my corporate career and take a launch into the unknown. I have to say, Peppy would not be here if it were not for the very, very supportive partners of the founding team.
Okay. I know how that feels. I would definitely, my wife would probably agree with that.
But you know what? I mean, when I was in MIT, it's a very, very startup focused environment. It's all about innovation, all about creating disruption through scientific and technological innovation. So I had been immersed in that world, and I was kind of just waiting for the European scene to wake up. And in the meantime, I'd had some amazing experience, built an amazing professional network, and started to develop a area of expertise, which was healthcare, but also had that experience as working in a large corporate organization, being a manager, a business unit head, holding a P&L. Also, I have two kids, so going on maternity leave and coming back in, what does that mean from a sort of professional point of view?
So all that experience really helped.
Very much. What I do at Peppy and my view on Peppy has certainly been shaped by all of those experiences.
So what is Peppy?
So Peppy is a healthcare company that enables employers, typically large enterprise, to support their employees through turbulent healthcare stages, things which are traditionally underserved by the regular healthcare system. So we're talking about things like going through the menopause, going through fertility journeys, early parenthood, women's health issues. So, for example, living with common gynecological conditions, men's health issues such as urogenitary issues or low testosterone. The things that are really in common with all of these is that for a lot of the time, people aren't acutely ill, but it's having an impact on their physical health, it's having an impact on their mental health, emotional health. It's probably having an impact on other people in their household, and it can have a knock-on impact on their ability to show up and be their best at work. We've all had those colleagues where we know something's not right, what's going on, you know, in a personal capacity. If people are struggling with, you know, sleepless nights with a young baby, or the stress of going through fertility treatment. I can see you nodding there.
Sleepless nights of,
you know, or, you know, anxiety because of their menopause and the fact that they're forgetting words in client presentations. All of these contribute to somebody's ability and willingness to really give their all in the workplace. You know, none of these are niche things, right? Every year in any organization, you're going to have a number of people going through a fertility journey, becoming parents, going through the menopause. These are widespread issues. And when you look at it on an enterprise level, this is a significant problem.
One of the surprises when we first met is you got me thinking, I was like, why are the traditional healthcare companies not addressing a lot of these challenges that you just mentioned?
Yeah. So I think if you think about what traditional healthcare is, it's there to deal with people who are sick. Right? There is a problem and they fix it. That problem has to be kind of big enough. Thing that we see very commonly in these journeys is it's a culmination of lots of problems that build up over time. So there's a bit of so it can be a bit of a frog in boiling water situation. Things build up until suddenly somebody wakes up and goes, hang on, what the hell has happened to my life? But also, they're not suited for somebody to seek help early. You don't go and make an appointment with your primary care physician or your GP, you know, the first time you have a night sweat as a menopausal woman. You think, oh, must have been something a bit weird. You wait till it's happened a few times, and then you go, hang on, what's going on? You know, you might chat with a friend. And really what Peppy is doing is, I call it filling the gap between kitchen table and the doctor's office door.
Interesting.
And the way that we do that, it's a fully virtual platform. So we have specialist in-house healthcare professionals. So you're not talking to a generalist healthcare professional, you're talking to a specialist midwife, a menopause trained nurse practitioner, a counselor about your mental well-being, etc. And they're accessible to you on your terms and on your time. So it can be looking at content, you know, following a video series, doing an online course, joining a virtual event on a particular topic that's relevant for you. You can chat to them, you can do consultations with them. So it can be as intensive as you need when you need it, or it can be much more passive. You know, I'm typically a 10 p.m. Peppy user. I, you know, browse content and send a message about something that's been bothering me that day, and then I get a message the next day.
I think it's really important what you said, because for me, like, I suffer from anxiety and panic attacks for years, and the idea of seeing a therapist was like 0 to 100, to your point. And it was really daunting, the idea of physically traveling to that location to see that person. So the fact that you know I could go on an app and slowly consume content, maybe go to a virtual event, and then slowly maybe work my way to that conversation. I'm much more likely to do that, right, than actually go straight in.
Exactly.
Which is and the first time I actually did have a session was a virtual one. And for me, it was I felt so much more comfortable. It was on my terms. It was actually about 9 p.m. at night after work one evening, and just took away all of the fear and like anxiety. You know, I'm already suffering from anxiety. I'd have even more anxiety about it, and that was a real game changer for me. And some of the things that I learned in the courses, just some little tools that like actionable tools that I could take away, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's focusing on exercising and mindfulness, etc. Those really made the difference for me.
You described really succinctly there, Chris, what exactly the premise on which Peppy's built. And we've had, you know, new mums tell us exactly this. I went to my midwife check-in, and they asked me if I was feeling down or are you feeling okay, and I just nodded my head. I'm feeling really overwhelmed.
But yeah.
And this has been my first ever interaction with a mental health professional, because I felt too scared.
Yeah.
And it felt like I felt like I was a failure to go and actually seek help.
Yeah, because you're right. It's almost part of going there is admitting that you need help. Yeah. That's really hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard. And so the whole idea of Peppy is you kind of bring down the threshold for somebody to engage in their health. You don't wait for there to be a problem that's, kind of big enough. People know if they're a new parent. People know if they're trying to become a parent. If you are sort of a 40-something-ish woman, you're probably curious about menopause, given all the noise there is about If you're a 40-something-ish woman, you're probably curious about the menopause, knowing all the noise there is out there about it.
What is the role of the employer? It's kind of gone from when I first started my career, didn't even have this conversation. None of these things even existed, to now where it's expected, and the new generation coming through, they almost demand services like this, if that makes sense. It's kind of gone, even the last sort of 10 years, it's been a huge transformation.
I think there's two ways to look at it, Chris. I mean, there's one way to look at it, which is, is this a perk for a sort of entitled employee base?
Yeah.
But the reality is there is a growing business case for employers to invest in this type of healthcare. Like I said, it's not like a cancer diagnosis or somebody getting hit by the bus. You can guarantee in any organization of a substantial size that these issues are there and they're hiding in plain sight. They are manifesting themselves in the organization in terms of absenteeism, in terms of presenteeism, in terms of your ability to retain those staff during and after one of these sort of episodes in their life. 1 in 10 women who experience menopause symptoms leaves the workplace, according to some data. 1 in 4 consider leaving the workplace. We know the issues around new parents. 1 in 5 men will not live till retirement age.
Wow.
And that is a shocking statistic when you compare that men of working age will present at their doctors at a fraction of the rate that women will. So they're dying of preventable causes.
It's not by just not going.
Yeah. So this is a real financial cost, right? In terms of your, everything from death in service, long-term sick, all of these things. And you will find that there are clusters of these issues around these life stages. And the investment, if you can make an investment where you can offer equitable health support to your staff, because Peppy is typically offered to everybody, shop floor to C-suite, it's an affordable way to really make an impact and really make a life-changing difference to somebody in their moment of need. So there is a pretty substantial business case that's emerging. Especially, in the US anyway, employers are responsible for the healthcare costs of their staff. Increasingly in markets like the UK, we're seeing employers needing to take up more slack because ultimately, we have an aging population in most parts of the world. It also means that if you need to have your workforce, you need to be embracing that multi-generational diverse workforce in a way that you've never had to before, because there just isn't the talent out there.
I was going to ask you that. What are the different, are you hearing different things from different generations, or similar? Is there different challenges for different generations?
There certainly are. Some of these things obviously correlate with age.
Of course.
So what's important to one generation, what's top of mind for one generation can be different to what's other. I think the interesting thing for me has been to see how much people take reassurance from seeing that other segments of their colleagues are being supported. So I've gone into organizations to talk about menopause support. Been really pleasantly surprised to have, young male members of staff show up, older male members of staff show up, younger women show up. And there's really good reasons for that. Number one, for the women, if you're biologically female, menopause is not just, an issue for midlife. It can affect much younger women. People want to know about how menopause might affect other people in their lives, partners, mothers, daughters, sisters, as well as their colleagues. And they take a lot of reassurance from knowing that they work for an employer where they will get that support at that stage in their lives, and therefore they feel like they could have longevity in that organization.
When should and when shouldn't employees get involved?
My view is that it works best when there is sort of an ability to provide support, but at some arm's length. A lot of these things are sensitive, people coming from very different cultural contexts. The way that we design Peppy is that it's there as a tool for the managers to provide a suite of support. We always say there's multiple pillars to supporting somebody who's going through a health challenge like this. So first of all, you kind of start with policies so that people know that there's permission to talk about it. The line manager training so that they're equipped to have a conversation without kind of panicking or freaking out.
Exactly.
Then there's sort of the very practical things, people needing loo breaks, temperature control, whatever, those kind of things, that provision of kind of occupational health type of stuff. But then fourthly, that individual still needs to be able to access the healthcare support that helps them actually improve their individual health, because otherwise you're still kind of leaving them there. And those details they will not want to discuss with their HR manager or their line manager. So what Peppy allows a team to do, an HR manager or a line manager, to say, hey, here is this tool. It is confidential and there are experts on it. I'm equipped to have an introductory discussion, to have the conversation around, maybe adaptations to your working environment, time off, etc. The things that, are appropriate to have a conversation with an line manager. But you as the employee are not under pressure to divulge things that you may not feel comfortable divulging.
That's a tough one, isn't it? Like for me, over the years, like that was one of the main reasons I didn't sort of tell. Like I would make excuses for not coming in because of my anxiety, or even like, I'll be off sick for a week, but it was actually because of my mental health. But I was so worried about saying that to my manager or my leader in case that they see me as weak, or I'm going to miss out on that promotion because Chris can't hack it, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. And I actually saw some research last year that it's something along the lines of like people would much more likely rather speak to a AI robot than their own manager about their mental health. And that's pretty telling, right? And it was for like thousands of people that they'd rather talk to an app, a platform like Peppy, than actually have a conversation with their own line manager.
So what we give them the option to do is to speak to healthcare professionals and experts, right? But that information does not cross that boundary.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we will share, of course, aggregated anonymized data about uptake and usage of the platform within their population. But nobody needs to know that, Fred from the accounts department has signed up to Peppy Fertility, or, Linda's on her third IVF cycle. Nobody needs to know that, right? That can be helped confidentially, but it's enabled by the employer. So one of the beautiful things that we see is people are very grateful to their employer for providing it, and they kind of see that it has been, provided as a benefit to them. They appreciate it. We've had spontaneous LinkedIn posts that have, acknowledged their employer, but they're getting that support in a very private way. So the employer is able to support them at arm's length with, not having to overstretch on expertise where it's not appropriate for a lay person to be giving, advice around supplements or, even lifestyle factors, let alone medical advice. But there can be a sort of seamless transition, signposting into something like a Peppy service.
What are the biggest challenges that you see when you're working with organizations?
I'll tell you a challenge we were expecting, but actually have been pleasantly surprised about. I mean, a lot of the topics that we talk about are very taboo societally, right? Be that menopause or, men's health topics, even fertility. Actually, fertility in the workplace is actually one of the most taboo topics.
Really?
Because people worry about what it's going to mean for them in the future. Will I not be put on that important project because they're worried?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to be, get pregnant.
Because they know.
Will I not be considered for a promotion?
Interesting.
Because, and you know what, I might not get pregnant. So it's actually a lot more sensitive than some of the other topics. What I've been really pleasantly surprised by is how little it takes to create that permission to talk about a topic.
So you thought that would be a lot more of a bigger challenge?
In the early days of Peppy, we thought it would be a lot bigger challenge, especially when it came to menopause, which, you know, wasn't discussed as widely then as it is now. Now we're seeing the discussion open up, not just in the UK, although the UK is a bit further ahead, but in all kinds of other geographies, there's a willingness to have that conversation in the workplace. And for people, sometimes if they're comfortable, to share personal stories. That has been really wonderful to see, because it's just a massive leveler, right? Suddenly everybody in that room becomes human. The hierarchy falls away. It does not matter if you are a VP or whether you are, you know, working in the post room. Like, those issues affect you.
Where do you see the role of HR in all of this?
The role of HR, I mean, we've spoken about this quite a lot, Chris, over various times, but it's evolving at such a massive pace. It's a lot to take on. I mean, if you think about the UK, which is the market I know the best, you know, obviously HR's come from a place of being largely legal, policy, procedural place, to then starting to be much more about people development, culture, organizational kind of health. Now HR leaders are being asked to take on responsibility for people's physical health and well-being. Certainly something new to the UK, although, you know, in the US has been much more well established. Financial well-being. That's
the new one, right? We didn't speak about that in the past.
Exactly. Learning and development in a world that's rapidly changing, and technology skills are becoming increasingly important to be refreshed and keep that workforce alive. So workforce skills management, upskilling, ongoing education. I mean, it's exploding. I think it's a real challenge. But this is where you come to the buy or build decision, right? As an organization, are you going to be an intelligent buyer of those services from third parties, rely on those expert third parties to provide you those services? Or is that something that you need to build a skill set in-house? I would argue that it's getting to too broad a spectrum to be realistic.
To be able to do that.
To do it all in-house.
Yeah.
You know, and quite frankly, that's why we founded Peppy, because actually this arm's length organization, which is kind of an extension of your HR processes, can work really, really well. And actually we think works better than trying to build in sort of first aiders and things.
You're not going to be experts on all these different topics.
You just can't.
It's impossible.
And again, as I said, in a multi-generational, more diverse workforce, the range of issues that you're going to be faced with starts to broaden.
There's probably some we don't even know about right now, right? That we will. The challenge that I hear from many HR leaders a lot of times is there's just so much noise. And there's so many, like every day there's a new platform popping up in their inbox that's claiming to solve all of these different challenges, right? And they're like, you know, Chris, I'm going to end up having 7 or 8 different platforms. Some actually overlap, some offer the same things. What advice would you give to them about that?
I think the answer is to go back to the data. What is it that you're trying to achieve with your workforce, and what are the things that move the needle? We work with some organizations where their workforce is skewed towards a much more sort of younger demographic, where the fertility and baby issues are the big issues for their workforce, and maybe some others that we focus on. Other places take real pride in having people who've worked there for decades, and actually the vast majority, and they've had sort of generations go through their workforce. For them, something like the men's health and menopause, and being able to sustain those people productively in their organization for another couple of decades, is really, really important. It's important to really understand the needs and listen to your organization as well. So, I mean, I have a privileged ringside view, right? I get to talk to lots of organizations about how they think about their health and well-being. But what I've seen works really well is when there's an ongoing dialogue, and they have feedback mechanisms to keep checking what's on top of mind, especially given the last few years with all the changes with the pandemic, the remote working, people coming back into offices, and so on. You cannot assume. You've got to be data driven in your decision making and really prioritize what you can focus on. And there will always be a long tail of other stuff. And make that systematic.
It's quite a different approach, right? Because in the past, if you looked at different things like this, as you said early in the conversation, it could be seen as like a perk, as like a nice to have, right? Now we're seeing it as a business imperative.
Yeah.
And also, to your point, it's not just a nice to have, it's looking at what are the challenges that we're solving, and then working from there and work backwards, then figure out what platform solution that you need.
Exactly.
Based on those key challenges. Otherwise, you're trying to sort of boil the ocean.
Yeah.
And it just gets crazy. And then you're asking your employees to go over to this app for this and go over there for there. And then guess what? They end up using, then they don't use anything.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't mean anything to Chris. I can't see myself in the solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're seeing in general, the drift away from perks and sort of things that are nice to have to things that are meaningful to people, and really make the difference on how they choose their employer, choose to enter into a relationship with an employer, and also choose to stay.
I was going to ask, I don't know, I didn't ask this earlier. Do you offer it to their people's families as well? Does it go beyond the employee?
Typically, it's employees and their domestic partners.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. I think that's super important. That's why I wanted to ask that. Right. It doesn't end at work. Work is home, and home is work, especially now. Right. So, when I was using the platform I was using, that's something my wife also could use, and it also helped us have conversations.
Right.
Because we was both using the platform. Right. So all of a sudden, we're sharing, having conversations, and it brought us a little bit closer together. Yeah. So I think it's important that we go beyond just the employee themselves and look at their partners.
And I mean, I know you're a parent. You will know both parents can be going on different journeys through the same parenthood journey.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. The challenges my wife went through versus me, completely different. And also similar at the same time. Strange. Yeah. As well. But it's important to have those conversations and have again, that opened up a dialogue with us that perhaps it wouldn't have. Before. What are you most excited about moving forward?
This is an absolutely fascinating time. We've had a massive shake-up after the pandemic. The demographics of just the global workforce are really tipping us into a new era of how we think about our health and well-being. We're all living and working for longer, which means there actually needs to be a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think about individually managing our own careers over multiple decades, and as organizations, how you actually make that work for your organization. And with that comes a whole host of health challenges and just life that happens during your working life. So for me, we're still just on the brink of an era where there's a lot of room for innovation. Yeah. And a lot of room for us to really reset how we think about life and work for each of us individually, in itself is quite fascinating.
Yeah, I think the pandemic was kind of a wake-up call. And I do feel like that was one of the silver linings that came out of it. It's just focus. It's renewed focus we have on well-being. And I hope that we can sustain it as well. I think that's one of the other challenges that I'm hearing from leaders that we speak to every day is how do we sustain this momentum and continue to ride the wave and make real change, lasting change.
Look, I mean, I understand it's a challenging financial environment right now for all organizations. I think it's worth thinking about what's the cost of not sustaining it for individuals.
It's a good question.
Right? I mean, and if we zoom out a little bit at a societal level, if people aren't able to work in their 50s, in their 60s, that has massive economic consequences for any society, not just, the UK or the US, but financially that just becomes completely unviable. And it becomes unviable at the organizational level as well if you're not able to attract, retain some of those demographics.
Before I let you go, parting piece of advice, and then where can people check out Peppy?
So you can check out Peppy at www.peppy.health. That's Peppy. I would say open the conversation. Ask people how they're doing, what's going on. One of the huge privileges I've had as being a co-founder of Peppy is the number of stories that people share with me, intensely personal stories. And it's often they're just under the surface. The minute you give permission, they come pouring out. And ask the question, be curious, and you'll be astonished at what's going on with the people you're working with.
Listen, I appreciate you coming on. Obviously, big fan of the work you're doing, of
Thank
course.
you, Chris.
And I wish you all the best until next week. It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.